set out from that gray, suffocating, foggy morning of the city, the only thing weighing on my mind was the burden of those exhausting funeral arrangements that had to be completed. 3 whole days, 72 hours spent with the smell of freshly dug earth, insincere condolences, and old family conflicts. I hadn't slept more than 5 hours in total. It felt as if fine grains of sand were moving behind my eyelids. Every time I blinked, those grains scraped my corneas, renewing that painful burning that forced me to stay awake. As the city fell behind me, I watched the setting sun in the rearview mirror. In that moment, I knew how big a mistake a night drive was. But staying breathing in that house with those memories for one more night was harder than dying. As I was leaving the house, I'd look back at the room one last time. The smell of damp had seeped into the old photographs hanging on the wall. My father's will was heavier than I had expected. It felt as though he had passed on not just property, but an accumulated anger as well. My hands were trembling as I took the car keys. I have to go, I told myself. I have to get out before this city swallows me. When I merged onto the motorway, the night spread like a drop of ink. The city lights faded and gave way to the endless, pitch-black darkness of the steppe. Inside the car, the faint smell of plastic and old upholstery competed with the cold night air outside. Beyond the narrow strip illuminated by the headlights, the world had vanished. There was only me, the engine's monotonous, soul-draining hum, and the endless song of the asphalt beneath the tires. When the first hour ended, the first strange phase of sleeplessness began. Visual distortions, roadside traffic signs looked for an instant as the light hit them, like white shadows running toward me. I rubbed my eyes, fiddled with the radio, but it was useless. The radio spewed only static. Within that static, I felt as if there were whispers coming from very far away. Just static, I told myself. Just physics. But my mind had already begun filling those gaps with horrifying possibilities. In the middle of the steppe, speeding along at 100 kilometers an hour inside a metal box, I realized how vulnerable I really was. The darkness outside wasn't just the absence of light. It felt like a substance, a dense liquid pressing against the car windows. Las 2:40 Alto M. As the odometer continued to turn lifelessly, I saw, ahead, on the right side of the road, the weak, flickering light of a single street lamp. I didn't have the strength to question why there would be just one lamp in such a deserted place on the motorway. When I saw the figure beneath it, cutting through the darkness like a blade, my heart missed its rhythm for the first time. A gray, worn-out jacket, a hood pulled over the head, hands in pockets, just standing there. No gesture, no raised hand, just standing. As the car approached, the rational voice inside me screamed, "Accelerate, don't stop." But another voice, deeper, coming from a darker place, said, "You're alone, and this loneliness will kill you, stop." Maybe helping someone would ease the guilt I felt from the funeral house, or maybe I just needed to hear a voice. My foot went to the brake. The thin scream of the tires tore through the night silence. The car stopped a few meters ahead of the man. Exhaust fumes hung in the headlights, forming strange shapes in the air. I looked at him through the rearview mirror. He didn't move. I waited like that for a while. I expected him to open the door and run, or to shout. But it was as if he wasn't there to wait. He was there simply to be. 1 second, 2 seconds. The fabric of time stretched. I heard the wind striking the body of the car, the metallic clicks of the engine as it began to cool. Finally, the handle of the right door was pulled slowly. The mechanical sound echoed like an explosion in the silence. The door opened, and the knife-sharp cold from outside poured in. But it wasn't just cold that entered. The heavy smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and very old, dusty fabric filled the cabin. The man sat in the back seat. When he closed the door, it felt as though the temperature inside the car dropped by 10 degrees at once. I heard the backseat cushions creak under his weight, but the silence that followed that sound was far heavier than before. "Where to?" I asked. My own voice sounded like a stranger's to my ear, so dry, so lifeless, as if the words turned to dust before leaving my mouth. There was no answer. He didn't even lift his head. He simply raised his hand. Those chalk-white finger sands slowly pointed out through the windscreen. The motorway's endless darkness. I nodded. I didn't dare ask anything else. I changed gear, released the clutch, and the car rejoined that river of asphalt. As I pressed the accelerator, the engine revs climbed, but the inside of the car still held that tomb-like silence. Nothing happened for the first 10 minutes, but the silence was no longer just silence. It was collapsing onto me like a solid mass. I tried not to look into the rearview mirror, but it was like a magnet pulling my eyes toward it. Every time I looked, I saw the same thing. That figure in the gray jacket, head bowed, frozen in a statuesque stillness. I tried to make out where his eyes were within the deep darkness of the hood, but the light refused to reach there. Then the second stage of sleeplessness began. Loss of spatial perception. The car was traveling at 120 kilometers an hour, but the scenery outside it, the darkness could even be called scenery, never changed. The same tree silhouettes, the same barriers, the same cracked asphalt. It was as if we were running on a looped tape, and the road wasn't actually moving. I glanced sideways at the passenger seat. It was empty, with a sense of weight coming from the back seat. That invisible hand pressing on my shoulders reminded me how real the presence there was. At one point, my eyes caught the speedometer. The needle was fixed at 120, yet the signs outside passed so slowly that it felt as though there was a desynchronization between the speed of time and the speed of the car. We hit a bump in the road. It was a hard jolt. My body bounced in the seat, my head nearly hitting the roof. The seatbelt slammed into my chest. That was the moment everything broke. I looked at the mirror. I had been shaken. The car had been shaken. The loose coins in the glove compartment had rattled, but that thing in the back seat hadn't moved a millimeter. As if he were stitched to the seat, as if gravity or kinetic energy had no effect on him. The image in the rearview mirror was like a video recording disconnected from the physical world. I froze. I couldn't take my eyes off the mirror. I looked at the man's chalk-white hands. They were resting on his knees. But in the mirror, inte mirar, those hands weren't there. In the reflection, the back seat was empty. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Empty. I could see only the stitching on the seat fabric, the faint dust marks on the glass. But he wasn't there. I turned my head sharply to the back. The man was there, sitting directly opposite me, with his gray jacket and bowed head. I turned back to the mirror, empty again. My heart began pounding against my rib cage. This had to be a hallucination. A mind that hadn't slept in 5 days couldn't process visual data properly. Your brain is erasing the reflection, I whispered. Just a system error. Your eyes are so tired they can't perceive the third dimension anymore. But that smell, that damp earth smell, was too sharp, too real for my mind to invent. It burned the bridge of my nose. That smell wasn't just a smell. It was a memory, the smell of the moment I threw the first shovel of soil onto my father's grave. I could no longer focus on the road. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, slipping. I swore not to look at the rearview mirror, but I couldn't help it. Every time I looked, that emptiness in the mirror became more terrifying, because every time I turned around, I realized the man was a little closer to me. At first, he had been in the far corner of the right rear seat, the point farthest from me. The next time I looked, he was in the center. The next time, He was directly behind my driver's seat. How was he doing this? The door wasn't opening. The seat wasn't creaking. When I looked back, he wasn't moving. He was just standing still. But the moment I turned forward and looked back again, the distance had shortened. 1 centimeter, then another, as if every blink gave him a chance to take a step forward. It was like a predator approaching its prey, silent, calculated, inevitable. At one point, I glanced at the side mirror. I saw white shadows leaping over the barriers along the motorway. No, they were just light. I tried to convince myself. Just reflections, just sleeplessness. But I could feel the cold of that presence on the back of my neck now. You need to get out, I suddenly shouted. My voice exploded inside the car, but vanished into the motorway's darkness. Who are you? What do you want? Why are you here? No answer. Only the engine's monotonous sound and the howl of the wind outside. I'm stopping. You're getting out right now. I slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched to a stop, smoke rising from the asphalt. I left the car right in the middle of the road, in the heart of that pitch-black darkness. My hands were clenched around the steering wheel, shaking uncontrollably. The doors are open. Get out. Go away. I was afraid to look back, gathering all my courage. I looked at the rearview mirror. It was still empty. There was no one on the seat. A flicker of hope ignited inside me. He's gone. He's really gone. Maybe he was never there. Maybe I opened that door myself. Maybe I imagined him sitting there, slowly, feeling every muscle stretched tight like a bowstring. I turned my head to the back. The back seat was empty. Truly empty. No gray jacket, no chalk white hands, just the empty seat cover. He took a deep trembling breath. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel, began laughing hysterically. I've gone mad, I said. Completely mad. My father's death, the lack of sleep, this road, they all came together and took my mind from me. My laughter echoed inside the car. My laughter stopped the moment I realized that the damp smell inside the car was still there. Why hadn't it gone? If it was a hallucination and it had left, why was the smell still burning my throat? Why was the car still so cold? With trembling hands, I turned the rearview mirror toward myself. I wanted to see my own face, to touch myself, even if only in a mirror. I adjusted it and saw myself. Dark circles under my eyes. My face pale as a corpse, but in the reflection, right beside my face, on my shoulder there was something. The edge of a gray fabric, and from that fabric, resting on my collarbone like a seal, like a claw, that chalk white hand. In the reflection, the hand was there, but in the physical world, on my real shoulder, there was no weight. I grabbed my shoulder, nothing. I touched only the fabric of my own jacket, but I looked back at the mirror. The hand was still there, and this time, its fingers slowly began sliding toward the throat of my reflection. The gap between what I saw and what I felt snapped the last threads of my sanity. At that moment, a sound came from outside. Tap, tap, tap. Someone was knocking on the driver's window. I slowly turned my head to the left, toward that cold glass. Just beyond the window stood the hooded silhouette, Batiswasanti, the motionless, silent figure that had been in the back seat moments ago. In the pitch-black darkness behind the glass, I saw only gleaming white teeth, a wide, twisted, dangerous smile that claimed to know everything and froze the soul. At the same time, in the mirror, that hand tightened around my throat. Even though there was no physical contact on my real neck, my breath was cut off. My lungs refused to draw air. I was suffocating. I was being strangled by a non-existent hand inside my own reflection. My eyes felt as if they were about to burst from their sockets. A voice was heard in the darkness, but it didn't come from outside. The smiling lips behind the glass didn't even move. The voice echoed directly in the folds of my brain, in the depths of my spine. This isn't the end of the road. We still have a long way to travel together.